As it turns out, it is ambiguous whether or not it's good to make the biggest comeback of all time. We'll talk about Kirk Cousins and Ed Donatell's changes to the defense here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, this game is the game for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game. Today, there's two things on the show that I want to get into. One is, it feels like Kirk Cousins isn't getting a lot of credit for doing what he did on in Saturday's game. And two is answers to Ed Donatell. Did he change the defense? Short answer, yes. Was it good? Also, short answer, yes. I'll go into that. And then there's some other stuff from yesterday's show that I want to sort of circle around to. But let me start with the Kirk thing. It's a weird week with Cousins because the game that he had, like what happened in the game was incredibly spectacular. And I've seen the take that's like, hey, what the Vikings did was awesome. Nobody's ever done that. Why were they in that hole in the first place? You know, why did they fall down 33 points to a 4-win team? And also stuff about how Cousins is, you know, his QBR is 33. He had a PFF grade that was like a 55 or something, which I think is below average for them. What's up with that? You know, what gives? How can you do something so good, have some, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns? How can that happen? But then all this other stuff says he's actually was just kind of like not that good, right? And I have a very long Patreon video about it, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. It's an hour long, going over a whole bunch of clips, showing stuff that Kirk did and explaining and talking about it. But I'll give you the short version here. Those metrics are trained on measurable things about the play, right? How many yards did it get? Okay, we know that. Where was the closest defender? We have tracking data. We know that, right? Was there a tight window or not? We know that that is measurable. You can pause the thing and say there's 2 yards between that, right? We've got data. What it doesn't have, the dots or things like depth of target charting. How was his footwork? Was that ball in rhythm, or was there something that made it take a little longer than it usually does? We'd have time to throw, but we don't have what the time to throw of a concept was supposed to be. So was it on time or not? I think the best way for me to describe Cousins' game is that execution was really clean for a lot of it. Stuff that went wrong in the first half was varying degrees of his fault, and we don't need to go play by play on it. But execution was very clean. The footwork was very clean. The ball was out. The ball went to where it needed to go quickly. Everything was very easy. That's really the takeaway. Stuff was easy. And Cousins owns the level of difficulty as much as I think any player does. And the scheme and stuff. Like, I think that all contributes to the level of difficulty. I talk about this all the time. If you want to watch a quarterback make life hard on himself, watch Justin Fields. He makes life hard on himself. Protection calls are wrong. He holds the ball. He runs it around. He bails on pocket. He makes his life a lot harder than it has to be. And then he'll make really cool plays. And you go, oh my God, look at all that stuff he overcame when he brought that on himself in the first place, right? Kind of the microcosm of why were you in that 33-point hole? Why were you still holding the ball with 4 seconds left so your O-line couldn't protect? And Cousins did the opposite. Cousins made his own life easy by getting the ball out on time, by being decisive, by being kind to himself with his reads. He wasn't forcing himself to make insane throws. Finding what was easy, finding what was routine, and finding a way to make that, like, that's step one. And he's always been pretty good at, finding the completion, right? Sometimes too good at it, because then he would find the completion that wasn't the good play. So finding not only the completion, but then being able to set that up. There are a couple of really great examples to KJ Osborne that converted and moved the chains that were fairly routine throws, but because they were on time, because they were in stride, and because they were accurately placed where they were supposed to be, nobody's eyes are popping out of their head on a 7-yard throw. But because it was so perfect, it managed to set up KJ Osborne to go get more yards after the catch, to fight, to do his thing, and then he gets credit for that part. But it's like saying, there was like a lot of yards after the catch. 64 of those passing yards came on a screen and all that stuff, is sort of quibbling over the proxy instead of just saying, okay, well, yeah, great, throw all that stuff out. Let's forget the stat line then. All right, fair enough. A couple of those touchdown, one was a screen, one was like a play action where the corner was way out of position, so it was a pretty easy throw. There's that Justin Jefferson one. Okay, so then let's not use the touchdowns as our foundation for the argument Kirk Cousins had a good game. Let's look at what he actually did. And what he actually did was very clean and boringly good. Maybe that's the way to put it. It was like boringly good. And when you go back into the room, and like, this is where you kind of have to confront, like, what's your perspective here? For me, I like to think, were I an assistant coach, if I were an intern in the Vikings and I were asked, hey, what did you think of this? What would you say? What would be the productive thing to say? And for me, I would say, yeah, if I were like in that QB room, right? You're not going, good job, Cousins, but there was a lot of yak. So, you did okay. Like, nobody's saying that, right? They're saying, hey, good footwork. You got the ball out on time. You did everything you needed to do to facilitate this incredibly difficult offensive achievement. Kevin O'Connell's play designs had their stake in it. The wide receivers had their stake in it. The offensive line had their stake in it. And rather than getting bogged down in a pie chart of credit, can we just acknowledge, hey, he did what he needed to do and set up his teammates to succeed? I mean, I've cried a whole bunch on this show about elevating the players around you. Cousins elevated his wide receivers. His wide receivers had a great game, and Cousins elevated them. And so now you get, this crazy game from KJ Osborne, 125 or whatever it was from Justin Jefferson. It takes more than one guy to do this, and playing point guard all day is, there's no shame in that, right? And this is on a higher level. This is the game manager argument, right? And when I say game manager, that is not a derogatory term when it comes from me. Tom Brady was a game manager. Nobody is saying that he was just like mid. But game managers become this really scary word. A game manager is somebody who is setting up their teammates to succeed. And the wide receivers may get more credit, like nationally, than Kirk Cousins will. Pretty sure Cousins himself is not going to care about that, nor will anybody on the Vikings. And that would not be to say that Cousins didn't have his influence on the game. It just kind of manifested itself in stuff that makes the wide receiver look more impressive and doesn't make Cousins look super impressive. And at the end of the day, that's not really anything you have to care about. Like, who cares? They came back from 33 points. When you hear game manager, you go, well, that's, game manager is just going to do these, super routine things. And you're never going to get the spectacular kinds of plays you need to, win shootout kinds of games. May I point you to, you game managed your way into the greatest comeback of all time. That's quite a lot. That worked. No notes. So that's why I'm going to say, yes, Kirk Cousins had a dope game. It was very clean. It was all good execution. It was a point guard game. That's how Cousins describes himself. He says, I just want to be a point guard. I want to, dish the ball out to the dudes that know what they're doing in space, get the ball to Dalvin Cook quick so he can score on a screen, execute that properly, execute an angle route for KJ Osborne properly so that he can fight through contact and convert a 3rd and 9, get the ball. When Justin Jefferson runs a route like that, my job is to get the ball to him quickly enough where all that razzle dazzle that he did is good and is actually like turns into the touchdown it's supposed to turn into. That's what Kirk Cousins did. And if he comes out and does that exact same thing every game, I don't think anybody's going to be complaining about it. I want to spend most of this talking about the defense. I think I've got a better beat on what the defense did and how it was different. And also, again, circling back to some of the questions that people asked yesterday that I needed to watch the tape for. I have answers to them now. But first, let me tell you about my new favorite phone game. It's Ultimate GM. If you are somebody, and I know you are, especially if you're the kind of person that's going to listen to Locked On Vikings in the offseason. If you're the kind of person that's thinking about draft picks and roster management and depth and cap space and all of that stuff, Ultimate GM is the phone game for you. It is... you have to hire the right coaches. You have to facilitate trades and negotiate and all that stuff. And you're navigating all sorts of things with your own franchise in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is also completely free and playable offline. So you can sit there on airplane mode if you have to and do it. And Locked On Vikings listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Start your dynasty today. There are also a whole bunch of new podcasts that I'm super stoked on coming from Audible. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Audible. They also have a new podcast called The League, which is also available as a bonus episode on the Locked On NFL podcast feed if you're subscribed to that. It's narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary trash talker Taylor Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. It's an 8-part docuseries about some of the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. Untold stories going from 1940s all the way through the present. And our bonus episode is called The Way of the Cowboy, and it's the story about the 1977 Dallas Cowboys, who unfortunately eliminated the Vikings in the NFC Championship, although they were pretty old by then. I was like the swan song of the Purple People Eaters. Head on over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Available now. Audible. Get in the game. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, covering all the biggest stories, headlines, games from the wide world of sports. Let's talk about Ed Donatell's defense. They had a better game. Now, I went over in the recap show and on the Minnesota Football Party and stuff, I've gone over the field position point about this game against the Colts. And essentially, if the Colts did not have a short field, if they weren't set up at midfield or just given a touchdown directly by like a pick six or whatever, then the Colts kind of couldn't drive down the field. They had one drive that started behind the 30 that scored in the whole game. Everything else was a short field. So if you could keep them behind the 30 with their original field position, keep them behind the 40, honestly. I think there were like two drives that started at like the 36 that got a field goal. But if you could keep them in reasonable field position, they basically stopped them. And the way that this worked, there are a couple of things that the Vikings did that I found very interesting. One was they really limited Jordan Hicks. To my knowledge, there is no injury or illness reason to have done that, and they have been phasing Jordan Hicks slowly out of the rotation and bringing in Brian Asamoah or other personnel packages. But it is very clear to me that Ed Donatell is experimenting, that he is trying stuff that they haven't really done this year and folding in new ideas. And to me, this looks like a team that is looking toward its playoff game and trying to use these last few games to get extra prepared for it. Whether they are the 2 seed or the 3 seed, which are the two by far most likely outcomes right now, I think is going to be less important than are they ready to play NFL caliber defense against whoever it comes to US Bank Stadium on the weekend of January 14th or 15th. That is, I think, a more pressing problem to solve, I think for sure, right? Some of the experiments that they have been trying are, so they ran a ton of cover one in this one. Ton of man coverage. A lot of you asked me about that, said, hey, did they run a lot of man coverage in this one? And I kind of said, I think so, but I had to check on it. I checked on it. Yes. They ran cover one more than half the time. That's a really insane clip to run cover one. That's like a lot. And it's a huge departure from the entire rest of the season. If you want to know, did Ed Donatel make a change in the defense because the defense was doing bad? There it is. There's the change to the defense. They ran a ton of cover one, and it was covered in the game. In the broadcast before the game, Tom Pelissero reported that they were going to do this. Patrick Peterson played the boundary side of the field, the short side of the field, because that's the side of the field where throws are quicker, right? They have less distance to travel because it's not as wide of a side of the field. So it's a little harder to play over there, a little easier to play over on Duke Shelley's side. That was indeed the case. And that's how they ran that much cover one. When you're in cover one, you can do all sorts of wacky things. You can play robber, where a safety comes down and tries to intercept something. You can play lurk, which is kind of the same zone, but a linebacker does it. You can play cross, which is kind of the same thing as lurk, except if there's a shallow crosser, instead of having somebody have to chase that all the way across the field, the linebacker will pick it up, or a safety will pick it up, and the linebacker will back off and become a lurk defender. There's all sorts of things. There's cover one dog, which is the word that I use, that I understand is used when there's a blitz, and certain pressures have different names. There's all sorts of different variants of cover one, but really it is man-to-man coverage. That's what cover one is. One deep safety, man-to-man across the board, 4 guys rushing, a fifth if you want it, or that guy backs off and does some weird zone stuff if you want it. It's very versatile. It's very helpful, but your corners have to hang on. And they did. Duke Shelley in particular hung on. He did well on the field side, and Patrick Peterson did well on the boundary side. They beat like Alec Pearson, whoever. Go Vikings. They did it. Part of that, too, was being in penny fronts, which is kind of how they got Jordan Hicks off the field a lot of the time. A penny front is your 5 down lineman, like its base, 1 linebacker instead of 2 linebackers, which is their true base, is 5 down linemen. And I'm counting like Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith as a down lineman, even though they're technically listed as outside linebackers. But, you know, Zadarius Smith, Danielle Hunter, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, and then it would be like James Lynch this time, or Kyrie's Tonga, Jonathan Bullard when he's healthy. You know, one of those. So there's your 5, and then you'd have Hicks and Kendricks. Take Hicks off, put Chandon Sullivan on, but don't take a defensive lineman off. That was their nickel. They would do like a penny thing with nickel in the secondary, and that's different. They hadn't done much of that at all going up into this season. So penny, cover one, that is the state of a Fangio defense that it like wants to live in. Like that's kind of the end goal, is to be able to do that and play defense that way. And I think the Colts game is a great example of why Fangio defenses want to live that way if they can trust their corners on the outside enough to do it. They also did a lot of Asamoah. I've got a Patreon video coming up on him. I'm not quite done like evaluating, but on the first glance, it looked pretty good to me. But we'll see. So I don't know. Tune into that again. Patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. But those were the big deals with Donatel's defense. The penny stuff is super interesting, and I'm pretty curious to see how it works out. But I do also have a couple of other little questions that I wanted to circle back to with like Christian Darrisaw, Duke Shelley and stuff. So we'll get into that. First things first, this episode is brought to you by Total Wine and More. This holiday, find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new single barrel bourbon or perfect gifts for everyone on your list, with some help from a friendly guide as well. And with all the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. So love what you find at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery are available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia or North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21. Couple of wrap-up notes here. Some things that I promised you that I would circle back to, and if you didn't catch that, go listen to yesterday's episode, mailbag as well. Somebody asked, hey, how'd Christian Darrisaw do? I didn't notice him. Yep, dominant. Like, holy crap. Christian Darrisaw is absolutely insane. He is a genuine pleasure to watch. You definitely didn't notice him because he was very boringly shutting guys down, and the attention is very easy to find focus elsewhere, which, you know, great for an offensive lineman. That's the goal. But he's very difficult to move. The hands are very heavy. a whole bunch of those moments. There was one highlighted on the Pat McAfee show where he gets all the way out. It was on, I think, a toss play, the big long. I think the first big long gain in the first quarter, that like the fumble came right after that one big like 40-yard gain or whatever it was. I think it was that play. Christian Darrisaw goes out, finds Stephon Gilmore in space, and just throws him out of the club. Just like hands totally off the frame. From the other angle, it doesn't quite look as good. It's like especially funny because of like the timing of when he goes off the frame. But just punishing that dude. Standing up to really gnarly bull rushes from somebody like a Fadio Denebo, who we know is a very strong pass rusher. That's like his strength is kind of his deal, his big, strong bull rush. He got a lot of sacks here this way or that way. Yeah, really good stuff from Darrisaw. I saw one time where he got beat by DeForest Buckner, and it indirectly led to a sack. That's the only one I didn't like. There was one rep I really, really liked. I sort of mentioned it yesterday, where Unique Ngakoue was sort of waiting and sort of trying to tee up something. And when you go up against the same tackle all day, that's what you kind of do. You find a tendency, and then you say, okay, you establish a tendency, and then you say, I'm going to break this tendency on the biggest third down I can find. And it was a 3rd and goal from the 1, touchdown to Adam Thielen. And if you go watch that play, watch Unique Ngakoue, he flashes to the inside of Christian Darrisaw, who had been setting very wide into Ngakoue all day, and he was kind of waiting for his moment to like go punish that. And Darrisaw recovered and actually took him further to the inside, managed to save the rep, even though Ngakoue kind of busted out that trick that he was kind of waiting all day to do. That's the kind of thing that, separates the men from the boys, as it were, that recovery when they get you, and eventually they will get you. But being able to push him inside, very good stuff. Also, a lot of people asked about Duke Shelley. Really nice game from Duke Shelley. Being on the field side, very helpful, right? Gives him just that much more of a second to react when he gets thrown at. It certainly wasn't perfect. There were certainly moments where he would get beat and give up separation, whether the ball came that way or not. But I think what I really liked the most about him is how he played in off coverage. How when things tried to break underneath him, he was very, very aggressively jumping on them. And they actually did try to get him with a double move a couple of times, but because he was on the field side, if he did bite, he had the time to turn around and recover. And that extra split second that the ball takes to get there, because it's just that much further away, was what it took for him to get into position. And also, a lot of those throws were bad because Matt Ryan doesn't have that anymore. That's at least the way it looked to me. So that was also very nice. Pretty happy with Duke Shelley on the whole, at least in this game. I want to see more than just one. If he can just be a corner, if he can be a starting quality corner, which that was a starting quality game from Duke Shelley, bar none. One starting quality game in the books, that rocks. His first starting quality game, I think the rest of the play we've seen from Duke Shelley has been, depth quality, which he's depth, so that's great. But if we want to start talking about, is he coming back next year? And so, I mean, he should come back to camp next year. Absolutely. But what's the role? And we want to start talking about that. I want to see him string more games like this together. And if he can string more games like this together, then that is really exciting. That means we may have found a little bit of a diamond in the rough here. But let's see that, keep up a little bit. I should also mention some news at the end of the show here. Garrett Bradbury got in a little bit of a fender bender and tweaked the back injury that has kept him out for the last couple of weeks. It's been listed as a neck injury before too. So I'm a little bit worried about the longevity of that injury, but we don't know anything about what the injury is, if it's muscle, if it's bone, if it's spine, if it's tendon, if it's anything. So we kind of just have to sit and wait and see, but it seems pretty likely that we get Austin Schlottman against Dexter Lawrence and the Giants. So, prepare yourself emotionally for that. Tomorrow, we are crossing over with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. And then, of course, we're going to do our bold predictions and stuff. Bold predictions are coming out today, by the way, Wednesday, because I'm on a holiday travel schedule. So I've got to record that one early. So get your bold predictions in. You should probably be able to see the tweet on my Twitter right now as you are listening to this, as long as you're not listening to this in like the middle of the night. But very likely that you can go get your bold predictions in there. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.